Thursday edition of Norfolk Developers. This evening, we're going to be looking at what's going on at Microsoft, Power Platform, bots, Teams, etc. Potentially some other interesting things. I'm going to mute that because that's me talking to myself from YouTube in the other window. Coming up at Norfolk Developers, we've got next week Cypress testing framework, which is extremely good for those of you who are doing front-end web apps, testing your any website or app that you want to test on the web. Cypress is a rising star in that area. The following week, another React-y type lean coffee event. These have been really good over the last few months, and well, actually nearly 7 or 8 months now. This is the third React one, so we do this every 3 months. So that means it's coming up to 9 months. Think about it. No, that means 6 months, actually, doesn't it? Anyway, moving on. Live streams every Wednesday. So those of you who've missed out on Alex's Laravel streams, you've missed out, but you can watch them again on the YouTube channel. Just have a look for those. There's lots more other things coming in October. We might have some other live streams on Wednesdays. Don't forget the Virtual Social Club, Fridays at 5:30 p.m. It often goes on very late, but potentially getting early this week because I hear there's plans for some gaming going on. So if that sounds like your thing, do stop by. 5:30, 7:30, doesn't matter. We'll be there for a good couple of hours in the evening, so do drop in. The Discord. Now, if you can scan this QR code in the next few seconds, you can jump in the Discord, but otherwise check out the Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or any of the other Norfolk developer properties on socials, and you will be able to get into the Discord chat. It's a growing, rapidly growing actually, and thriving community full of people talking about technical stuff every day. Don't miss out. So a big thank you again to our sponsors on Patreon. Now, some people have chosen to contribute a few pounds every month, help us keep these events going. We use an inordinate and unexpected, let's stick to words we know, number of services to keep these events running. You wouldn't believe actually how many there are. So anyway, we're not begging, but if you feel like these events bring you value, do stop by the Patreon and consider stopping by. And these are the names of some of those people who have already done so. And thank you very much to all of them. Right, let's chat Power Suite and bots. I will hand over to Tom and stop talking.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well.
All yours, Tom, although your sound may be off.
Oh, really? How about now? Oh, you can hear him.
Oh, no,
okay, good.
Muted
Oh, that's all right then. Good. Vaguely panicked me for a second. Fine. So give me 2 seconds whilst I flail and figure out how to share my screen again. As you might expect, I actually spend quite a lot of time in Microsoft Teams and not in Zoom, but that's okay. We're there now. Okay, so as you can tell, I've spent all the time preparing the template for the slide. I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about what's been happening recently at Microsoft, what's been going on. You know, I'm aware maybe one of the really nice things actually I find about this group, as opposed to some of the other groups I'm involved with and kind of give talks to and stuff like that, is that this is a geographically based group. And so by virtue of that, it's fairly platform agnostic, it's technology agnostic. So I'm not talking to a bunch of Microsoft folks this time. I'm talking to maybe like people where actually Microsoft is a distant 3rd, 4th, 5th or 6th choice when it comes to technology or operating system or cloud provider. And that's kind of interesting because it means I can come along and say, you know, this is how it looks over here, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, maybe it's just different. And so we can all talk about it and just, yeah, I can take some stuff away as well from how things are going on the non-Microsoft side of the fence as well. So yeah, so if you're in the Zoom, feel free to kind of butt in with questions if you want. I really don't mind. And we can, I've got a kind of a loose agenda of things I want to talk about. I realise it's a pretty wide scope saying what on earth's going on at Microsoft, and I could go in a million places. So I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go here. I'm not going to go here. But I'm going to kind of roughly start here and sort of think about the last couple of months. Obviously, as you might expect, Microsoft Teams has gone a bit crazy. as everybody decides to work from home, it's been really interesting. So backstory, I work for a company that spends quite a lot of its time helping really big organizations get going with Microsoft Teams, helping them move from Skype for Business, helping them move from landline phones, and really no kind of form of collaboration. And typically that's quite a slow process. If you've got 100, 200,000 people, you don't just move them to Teams over the weekend. It's a process, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of money. So it's been really interesting to see, actually, it does happen in a weekend when you really need it to. And so that's been a fun kind of challenge and process to go through. And we've learned lots of things. And I think Microsoft have learned lots of things as well. There've been a couple of ups and downs along the way and some scale issues, but more or less they've kept the lights on, I think. And they've got some pretty impressive numbers now around usage. So yeah, lots and lots of people now are using Microsoft Teams every day to talk to their colleagues and get stuff done. And that's really good. One of the things Microsoft Teams does in amongst chat and calling and meetings and all that sort of stuff is app integrations. And on one level, that's interesting. You know, you can write apps that work in Microsoft Teams, and that's great. And I spend a lot of time talking to people about doing that. But there's sort of another part of it as well, which is what Microsoft call the Power Platform, which sounds a bit like I don't know, like a child's toy. But what it is, well, firstly, what it is used by an awful lot of people. It's really Microsoft doing what they call empowering citizen developers. So what does that really mean? It means you don't always need to call a developer in to get something done. Now, as a developer talking to a group called Norfolk developers, I realized the initial action to that might be a little, like the initial reaction to that might be a little bit, well, hang on, like I want you to call us in, please. For all sorts of good reasons, not just because we like our jobs, but also things like security and compliance and governance and scale and reliability and backups and all that sort of stuff. So there's that, but there's also Microsoft recognizing that actually when people need to get stuff done, sometimes the process gets in the way of that a little bit. And also there are like a million problems to solve. And so if we can solve the really easy ones without needing to get professional developers involved, everybody can just get on with their day. So that's kind of where they're coming from with the Power Platform. So I thought, let's spend some time talking about what the Power Platform actually is. And then there's a million other things that I could talk about. Roughly, I've sort of bullet pointed some of them that I think they're not part of the Power Platform, to be clear, but they do make up what I think of as quite interesting low code or no code helpers for developers that mean that they don't always have to write everything from scratch. And so I'm going to go through some of those and show you some of them as well. So I keep talking about the Power Platform. What on earth is the Power Platform? Okay, so basically it's these four things. They've all got power in the name, and that's why they're the Power Platform. And that's really the only thing that sort of ties them together, really. Let's go through them really quickly, and I'm gonna talk through all of them, and then we can always come back and sort of double down on some of them if they sound more or less interesting. So Power BI, let's go through them in order. So Power BI is reporting. So nothing to do with developers writing applications other than if one of the things you were being asked to do as a developer is a bunch of reports and reporting, yes, you could go and do that in a million different ways. You can go and get Chart.js and kind of wrap it yourself. And if that's the requirement, that's great. But if you're doing stuff for an organization that lives in a Microsoft world, then actually there is a Microsoft tool to do this, which is called Power BI, and it plays nicely with all the other Microsoft tools. And it's kind of drag and drop for doing nice visualizations, visualizing stuff on reports, putting them into pages, throwing them up to the web, letting people share them and collaborate. It's got all this kind of like, you know, dynamic filters and stuff built in. So if you click one of the boxes, it kind of refilters everything else on the page. It easily connects to a lot of Microsoft stuff. The pitch Microsoft make is that you don't need to be a developer to drive it. You can give it to business people. That sort of is sometimes true. It depends how good the business people are. The other thing it really depends on is how good the data is. So, and I don't mean by quality of data, I just mean the shape of the data. If you think about the data, a lot of data when it's stored is not stored with reporting in mind. It's stored with either speed in mind or relationships in mind. It's not necessarily stored for reporting in mind, and that makes it harder to use any kind of reporting tool. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about Power BI, because it's not really development. It's what it sort of is. It's visualization of reports. It's interesting and important, but it is what it is. Next up, Power Apps. So this really is a kind of tool for building applications, and it's meant to be low code, no code. It's good for kind of simple CRUD things. So if you've got like a detail list view and you want to connect it to a database or a SharePoint list or some other data store that you've got, you can do that pretty easily in Power Apps. You get a nice visual UI. You can drag and drop all the bits like buttons and text boxes, and you can do validation and colors and stuff. It's a kind of entry-level coding environment, and it's really hard to say entry-level coding environment without it sounding like I'm dismissing it, and I'm kind of not. What I mean to say is it's not a professional IDE, but if you think about it, for a lot of the things that get built today, you don't need a professional IDE. You need something that can quickly help you build your whatever it is CRUD display to show this list of data from the database for Maureen and accounts, right? And that's what a lot of people's lives are. So if you can do that really easily and quickly in a nice platform like this, which you can then hand off to users and not have to maintain, because either maintaining is interesting because it's more maintainable to go through something like this than it would be to roll yourself. But obviously somebody still needs to look after it. Again, Microsoft pitch is that this is empowering citizen developers. You don't need to be a developer to do this. It's worth saying, as you might imagine, there's a kind of a cliff you hit with this. So it's good for the things it's good at, and it comes with lots of templates for doing things. So if you have a SharePoint list and you want to be able to list things in it and have an approval workflow and all these sort of things, and you can find a template from one of the many templates Microsoft have, you'll be good. Even if you're doing it from scratch, you'll be fine, but you might come across something that it can't do, and now you're at a bit of a cliff edge because you absolutely can extend it, but now you're into writing code. So that's why I've sort of said you don't need to be a developer, but there is a cliff. There's also a cost. It's worth bearing in mind. This isn't free, as in beer. There is a cost. Now, sometimes the cost is sort of borne and sort of consumed, if you like, by the licenses that you or your organization have. I'm just, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and this is one of those places. Power Automate. So if you've never heard of Power Automate before, if you've heard of if this then that, it's that basically, but for Microsoft. It's a flow charting way of tying together actions that happen. So I don't know if you haven't used if this then that, then that's probably the easiest thing to do is to just kind of look it up. It has a number of inputs and a number of outputs, and then you get to kind of draw them together with little boxes. The idea is like, if this thing over here happens, then this thing over here should happen. If my back door opens, then my garage light should turn on, that sort of thing. And so Power Automate is that, but for the Microsoft stack. So it's got connectors into all Microsoft 365 services. It's also got hooks into all of your Microsoft 365 data. So that might be your team's chat. So you can say, when a new message on this channel happens, go and do this thing. Or it might be when something, I don't know, this user shows up in a weird place, or a file gets added to this drive, go execute this action, send a message into Teams, or send an alert, or send an email, or add a row to a database, or whatever. Again, lots of templates for common things, including approval workflows through SharePoint, and it's a nice visual flowchart designer. Again, Microsoft would say you don't need a professional developer to do this, and I kind of agree. I use this quite a lot actually, so I do professional development, but there's a lot of things where stuff just needs to happen, and I don't particularly want to write another utility program or bit of PowerShell script or bash code or whatever else it is, just another utility function that I'm going to forget about and it's going to break and I'm going to not realize. This kind of surfaces it. It's a nice place to do it. It keeps it all in one place. It will shout at me if it doesn't work. It'll run it on a schedule, or I can trigger it from the mobile app, or you can actually trigger it in response to somebody filling in a form. There's all sorts of interesting things you can do. quite a lot of business is like that. It's all just process led of things moving around the system. So this is good for kind of joining all those dots together. Okay, so I haven't spoken about Power Virtual Agents, which is the fourth triad is the wrong word because it's 3 quadrant, whatever the, I don't know, in the Power Platform team, the fourth member. But I'm going to talk about that in a minute because it's quite similar to something else I'm about to talk about, which is the bot framework. So we're now kind of moving slightly outside of the Power Platform, but still very much in territory of things that can help developers get useful stuff done. Bot framework. So bot framework, oh, I'm missing I went from white to black halfway through prepping these slides, and you can tell there's a black on black icon of a user next to that leftmost arrow. You just have to imagine them. Bot framework. This is how you build bots in Microsoft land, and fundamentally it's a abstraction to lots of different services, some of which are Microsoft and some of which are not. You can see the icons on the screen. The idea is you write your code against the bot frameworks SDK and against the bot frameworks way of doing things, and then you can simply toggle enable as many different channels as you want your bot to operate on. So that makes it quite cool for developers because it means you only have to write your bot once and then you can light them up on all these different platforms without having to understand the like finicky ways that they all work. That's nice. It also works in some speech ways as well. So it will work with Google Home, it will work with Amazon's Alexa, and so you can kind of talk to it as well. Literally the same code. So this isn't going to work very well, but this is a video here with some sound, and the sound is the critical part. But I haven't thought through far enough to figure out that the system audio should come through here as well. But it's fine. Oh, really? Oh, it might do. Okay.
Yeah, there should be a view option at the top.
Okay.
Show you sound possibly.
Share computer sound. Right, we'll give it a go. So basically, I'm going to tell you what it does just in case it doesn't work. So as you can see, that's a Sonos, but it's the one that's got the Amazon Echo built into it. I had a bot that I'd written to do Teams presence. So it would monitor my presence. That way, the reason I did that was to surface it in like an LED, like a red and green LED, so that the other people in my house, now that I'm working from home like everyone is, could tell when I was on a call, when I was busy, when I was do not disturb and all that sort of stuff. And then I thought, well, actually it'd be quite cool to put it into one of these so that you could kind of ask what I'm doing. So that's what I did. So let's play this and see what happens.
Alexa, ask Presence Helper what Tom is doing.
Right now, Tom is in a call. He has been like this for 4 minutes.
Right, so you can see there, like that's a nice simple bot. It just read the information about my presence. The key part to that is that I'd written that as an IM-based bot first, and I literally just toggled it on for Amazon, and it just worked. I went through the setup of like onboarding the Amazon dashboard thing, tied some keys together, but I didn't have to write any more code. And so that's kind of a really interesting thing that the bot framework does. That's kind of obviously super useful and really kind of interesting, and it's an area that is moving pretty quickly at the moment in inside Microsoft. There've been a lot of bot framework additions at Ignite this year. So we've just finished up Microsoft Ignite, Microsoft's Developer and IT Pro conference, slightly more skewed towards IT Pro than it's developer, but to be honest, it's both that and Build, which is the developer one, are kind of melding into one these days. So
Alexa.
Oh, sorry. So that is really interesting. There's lots of things you can do, and actually you can use bot framework in a couple of different ways. At its very lowest level, you can just use it like an API calling service. When you set it up, the bot framework is the thing that deals with all the different channels, such as Teams or Slack or Facebook Messenger, or however it is you want your bot to appear to users. The bot framework will call your code when interesting stuff happens. So you give it an endpoint, like an API endpoint, and say, you call me when somebody sends my bot a message, or when somebody adds my code adds my bot to their life, and you then get those messages. You can then send back responses, and that's how kind of your bot operates. Doesn't always just have to be text. You can do what are called adaptive cards as well. They're like rich text, images, layout, embedded video, embedded audio, buttons. You've got lots and lots of different options for doing things. So that's kind of the lowest level you could use it at. There's also an SDK, which is nice. It abstracts the plumbing. You can do it in C#, you can do it in JavaScript, you can do it in Python, which I could spell correct better. You can do it in Java. And it's got a bunch of adapters, it's got a bunch of community open source extensions and all the rest of it. So that's a kind of a nicer place to be, unless you have to deal directly at the API level, just because it's easier and quicker to get stuff done. Separately and kind of on top of that is the idea of bot framework skills. So these are composable parts, they're reusable blocks. So, and then they're meant to kind of sort of encapsulate specific bits of functionality. So for instance, the weather, calendar, mail, all those sort of things, you can sort of plug them into your bot, and then suddenly your bot does stuff. So let's say I plug in the calendar skill, which is something Microsoft give away, give you as part of the bot framework. Then suddenly I can use my bot and say, what am I doing tomorrow? And it will just look at my calendar and tell me, or I can say, book a meeting next Wednesday with Sarah from HR, and it will look at both of our calendars and say, well, this time would work. Is that okay? And I get all that for free. And it's a really nice thing to build into when you're building bots for, organizations, businesses and stuff. A lot of, the workflow tends to revolve around kind of meetings and mail and all these sort of other things, but also interesting things like weather and restaurants in the local area. And there's a bunch of different skills that you can sort of download and use and modify if you want. And you can also obviously write your own skills as well. So inside an organization, an internal IT team might write a skill that is very specific to that organization as well. And then that can be reused by other people inside the organization. So yeah, separately to that, or sort of on top of that, I suppose, is what's called the Bot Framework Composer. And this is pretty new. It came out at back end of last year, about this time last year, actually. And it's a UI for building bots, which is kind of really interesting. So it's a nice visual designer for creating the same code that I just talked about before in Bot Framework. The important thing to remember is that it looks like a nice visual designer, but it is actually creating real code as well under the hood. So at any point you can drop out of the designer and then you're back into real code. So that's quite nice for doing like proof of concepts and spikes and stuff, because you can start off very quickly dragging all these component parts together and just hooking them together just to get something roughly working. And then when you get signed up for the project, download all the code and you've got actually a nice template for how stuff should get done. And you can actually make it good and fast and integrated and bespoke and whatever else you need it to be. It's also really good for sitting with business people, and you can really understand the flow of how stuff's happening when you see it on a nice flow chart as well. Integrates really well with other Microsoft services like cognitive services. Cognitive services, if you haven't looked at them inside, like Microsoft cognitive services, are really interesting. They're things like doing natural language processing to understand what's being said, doing real-time translation of text and speech, ingesting like an image and then telling you exactly what's in the image, like extracting meaning out of invoices and letters and all these other things. So all of those parts come together so you can actually have a really nice clever bot that you can give it images and it knows what to do with them, and it can send them off to the right people, and you can build up these things kind of pretty easily now. So yes, so let me show you quickly a bit of bot framework. So and bot framework composer. So my kind of go-to for building bots in a demo is the weather, because everyone understands the weather and everyone understands what a weather bot might do. But it's a nice example because really all it's doing is calling an API, which is the weather. There's an open weather map API, and I'm just calling that. And so everybody can relate to it because everybody has something that is served by an API that they would like to build a bot around. So this weather one's quite a nice example. I've been doing this for a few years, this weather one. Back in 2017, maybe, I used to do like a talk where I'd build a bot in a 60-minute session, but literally the whole 60 minutes was me typing code because it took 60 minutes to write a weather bot. And so I'd kind of go, and it was terrifying as well. It was just like, you can imagine, like, you can't make any slip ups. If it doesn't compile, like, you're against the clock suddenly, and yeah, it was a nightmare. It was probably pretty boring as well, if I'm honest. So that was interesting. About a year later, that whole same process took about 30 minutes because of the Azure Bot Service, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But now this is what this is, and it takes like 10 minutes to do. And all these are kind of composable parts. So for instance, so I've jumped in halfway through this bot where I'm in the kind of weather skill here. And I know I'm here. I get here because of the trigger phrase of weather. Now, this is cheating, really, using trigger phrases, because nice bots don't use trigger phrases. They use natural language and they use recognizers and stuff like that. But I didn't want to do any of that. So I just used a really simple trigger phrase of weather. And I can add just these bits to build out my bot. I can do loops, I can do conditions, I can ask a question, I can access external resources, I can do all this stuff. I can do OAuth login. All I've done is ask wherefore, and then I'm just going to take that and store it in a variable called dialog.location. I'm then going to call that API that I spoke about, and I'm going to pass it the location, and that's going to give me back the weather. I'm going to do some fairly basic checking for an OK status code. And then, assuming everything's all right, I'm just going to pull the weather data out. This is just JSON at this point, this weather data.content. And then I'm just going to reference little bits of the JSON to give a nice kind of response. So I can build these up as like a nice bot. And it's nice because you don't have to know anything about coding or the bot framework. You can see how this is going to work because it's all visual and it's all on the screen in front of you. There's a nice emulator I can use that is going to open on the wrong screen. And so my trigger word was weather. And so I'm going to do that asking thing I told you about. I'm going to put in Norwich. It's going to go and call the API, bring it back, give me the answer. We're done, right? So pretty simple for a bot. Doesn't do anything magic particularly, but you could kind of see how that could be looking at your legacy application server, anything like any other service on the web. It could be performing actions. It could do whatever you want it to do, really, because at this point it's just calling APIs. So bot framework, this is really scratching the surface of what bot framework and the composer can do. It does lots of interesting other things as well. You can drop skills into this, all those kind of things I was talking about, the weather and all that sort of stuff, and all those calendar and all those other skills you can drop into here as just like big blocks. And you can build out, obviously I've got two here, the greeting that you see when you first go in about asking about the weather, and the actual weather skill itself. You could build loads and loads down here and make something really kind of quite complicated. So that's Bot Framework Composer. So if you're building bots, it's worth having a look at because it's interesting. It's relatively quick to get going. You can try it all offline before you go anywhere and publish anywhere and incur any kind of costs or anything like that. It's priced, I think, pretty reasonably. First 10,000 messages free, I think. Here we go. So bot framework is one of the natural question that comes next is like, the bot framework is great. I can see how to build the bots, and you've told me that they work on lots of different channels, but actually how do I go from writing the bot code on my machine and testing it in the emulator locally, which is what I just did, to actually showing it online, getting people to actually use it, throwing it into Slack and Facebook Messenger and all these other things? And the answer is you have to host it somewhere. And one of the places you could host it, but you don't have to, is the Azure Bot Service. So this is part of Microsoft Azure. So I'm not going to assume you are completely familiar with Microsoft Azure, other than it's Microsoft's cloud service. So what I'll do is show you a little bit of how it looks. It comes with like a nice built-in code editor. It actually comes really easy to set up with some templates. So you can actually start building bots a couple of different ways. You can start from the composer, which is where I just was. And actually from the composer, you can publish directly to Azure Bot Service just by following some wizards and going that way. Or you can start in that bot service with a template and go backwards that way. You've got a couple of different options. So let me show you what that looks like. So okay, so this is my Microsoft Azure instance, if you like, my account. Resource groups are just groupings of like easy way to group stuff up. So let's go into one that I don't care very much about. and click add. And this is where I add new things to my Azure instance. So if I was to search for a new web app bot, this is how I'd go and create one of those. So it's pretty straightforward. You give it a nice name, like so. That's not being used. Choose some options. I'm going to choose the free pricing tier of 10,000 messages a month. I'm going to choose this template of an echo bot, which just echoes back anything I send it. I'm going to turn off App Insights for a second, just because it makes creating it slightly faster. App Insights is like telemetry, basically. So you get lots of interesting information about how many calls got made, where they went, what worked and what didn't, and all the rest of it. So that's going to go and create my bot. We might come back to it in a bit if it takes any more than like me rabbiting on for the next 30 seconds in the interest of time, but we'll just give it a little bit just to see if it's going to create it really quickly. Creation speed used to be really easy to predict until about March, April time. Now it's a bit more variable for fairly obvious reasons, probably. So we'll just give it a second and see if it's going to see what it's going to do. No, let's carry on. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. That's basically how you set up an Azure Web Bot instance, though. You click through, and it's kind of easy to get going. The Azure portal, by the way, is actually quite nice as a cloud portal. I really like it. I think it's quite easy to see what's going on. Yeah, but then I don't have an awful lot of experience with some of the other cloud portals, so there's that as well. One interesting type of bot, if you like, that uses both of these technologies, but under the hood, so you don't really see them, is Q&A Maker. I'm just going to pause for a second. Q&A Maker is a service. It's more of a bot as a service. It takes data, whatever that means, and it turns it into a bot. And the data could be unstructured, so it could be an FAQ page, it could be a website, it could be a manual you have, a PDF. Basically, what it does is it ingests all of that and comes up with question answer pairs. And it gives you a nice portal, so you can see all those question answer pairs. It then wraps natural language processing over the top to give you a bot that users can just ask questions about the particular domain, and it will give them the right answers based on the data you fed it from the FAQs and the websites and the manuals and the rest of it. It's completely a no-code solution, but what it's actually done is created code using bot framework, using Azure Bot Service, so you can take it and extend it later if you want. And it kind of supports multi-turn conversations as well, which are like follow-up questions. So rather than just a very simple question answer, it will support more complicated, like how do you get to our offices? Well, are you cycling? Are you going by train? Are you driving? Like that's an example of a multi-turn conversation where there's several different answers depending on the outcome to follow-up questions. So I was thinking, what's a nice example, nice topical example we could use to make a Q&A bot out of as a kind of good example. And I had a look to see if Norfolk developers had a lengthy FAQ page. I couldn't find one, unfortunately. So instead, I went with this one. I thought this might be interesting. So I went to that page and I just fed the whole page, the URL of the page, to Q&A Maker. I didn't touch it. I didn't tune any of the output at all. It came back with 143 Q&A pairs. I haven't looked at them really, other than the two that you can just about see on the screen around visiting people indoors and how many of them. And you can see it's done something. It's done a fairly good job of putting out the questions and the answers. I've written no code. Right, there's a URL on the screen. You're welcome to go there and break it. In the meantime, I'm going to show you how it works and also show a bit of it working as well. So let's come back here. So this is a good time to come back to the Azure Bot Service actually, because I'll show you an empty one and then a full one. So this is the Azure Bot Service we literally just created, the Nordev 12341. Okay, so if I'm coming to this for the first time because I'm building a bot for the first time, fine, I can kind of see a bunch of things and settings and analytics. There's a test in web chat function, so I can click that. This is me testing my bot in the web browser in a really nice, just kind of like fire a question and it fires back the answer. So this is that echo template I spoke about. Okay, so it's a basic bot. It doesn't really do anything. We haven't given it any code. All it's done is loaded this template. Okay, so that's fine. If I go into build, oh no, let me show you actually. If I go into channels, this is where I can light up all of those services I talked about. I literally kind of, each one's got its own onboarding process. Some are a little bit more involved than others. So by default, I've got web chat, and then I can add all these other ones in if I want to. If I go to build and so look at the online code editor, I can actually see the code that is this template. This works better if you want to use Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio, it's entirely up to you, or any other code editor actually. But if you're in a hurry or in a bind, you can do it all online in this online code editor. And I only bring that up because it's quite a nice way of showing you the template code that kind of you can immediately get access to and start to understand how it all works. So you can see all the source code, if you like, for the bot is here. And like this is C#. You don't really need to know much C# to see kind of what it's doing. This is just that echo right here. Actually, it's just putting echo in front of whatever it was I said and sending it back. So this is a great jumping off point to understanding if you want to build a bot from scratch in code. Starting with a template like this is a really nice way to go. Okay, so let's come back slightly and go and have a look at the bot that we made that I now can't find. Where is it? Okay, the COVID bot, or whatever it is we want to call it. This is a web app bot exactly the same. I made it through Q&A Maker. So let me just show you what that looks like. I can do this without killing the screen share. All right, you go away, and then under here we go. This is Q&A Maker. This is the thing I made. It was really easy. I went here, qnamaker.ai. I signed in. I clicked create a knowledge base. I literally gave it that address of the government's FAQ page. I chose, I can't remember what I chose for my chit chat, friendly, I think. And I clicked create the KB. That's all I did. It then did all this, and we're back in the same place where, hopefully this makes sense. We're back in the same place of it's created a bot, it's created all this other stuff as well that it needs to get the job done. But fundamentally, this is still a web app bot, so I can still go to test in web chat. If you went to that URL before, you probably would have already done this and seen that it's a bot that works. I hope it's where it now doesn't work. But I can now ask it coronavirus related questions like, can I go to the pub yet? And it will give me what it thinks is the right answer. Now, to be clear, the government's FAQ page does not specifically have a question entitled, can I go to the pub yet? What it's done is wrap some natural language processing around that to figure out the most appropriate answer to give me, which, to be fair, is pretty good. It's around eating and drinking, it's around visiting pubs, restaurants and venues and all that sort of stuff. So it's done a fair job. That's a kind of, I did that in like 10 minutes, didn't write any actual code to do it. And for a lot of applications, that's perfect. Like if you want to write a bot to expose some data with natural language processing, knock yourself out with Q&A Maker, because there's no point reinventing the wheel when you've got something like this that is super easy to use and kind of super scalable and works really well. And if you want, you can go straight to the code and see exactly how it's working and extend it as well. So that is Q&A Maker. Now, I promised to come back to Power Virtual Agents, and this is a good time to do it. So, Power Virtual Agents, they are part of the Power Platform. They are a bit like bots. They're a bit like the bots I've just spoken about, but they're not. And if that sounds confusing, it's kind of a bit, because it is. They were also announced in the same conference that the Bot Framework Composer was announced at last year. And they're also a UI for building bots. So that's classic Microsoft to announce 2 UIs for building bots at the same conference. They are very much a no-code solution though. So whereas with the Bot Framework Composer, you can build composable parts in UI and you can break it out into code and then extend the code. You can't do that with Power Virtual Agents. It's very much as a service. Their key kind of superpower, if you like, is that you can directly execute flows. So flows are the Power Automate things I talked about, the if, this, then that. That thing, the Microsoft version of that, you can directly execute those from Power Virtual Agents. So if you've already built up lots of flows to get stuff done inside your organization and automate kind of key tasks and stuff like that, Power Virtual Agents work really well for putting a nice interface in front and getting out to users, collecting the information you need to execute that flow, and then sort of kicking it off. They are licensed in a way that the bot framework stuff is not. So I think that pricing is still valid. They are what they are. Like, they're a no-code solution. There is a cost to them. They do one thing kind of really well. They also hand off to human. They've got lots of really good powers, actually, and like capabilities, I suppose, the best way of saying it. But they're not a stepping stone to a developer downloading it. They also play nicely with Bot Framework in that the skills that I spoke about in Bot Framework, you can actually execute those skills in Power Virtual Agents. So there is a lot of crossover under the hood between the two of them. I said that Bot Framework didn't have a license cost, and that's true. The thing to bear in mind with Bot Framework is that you're creating all those resources in Azure, in the cloud, and so you have to pay for them there. Whether that works out cheaper or more expensive than Power Virtual Agents, you have to do the maths. It completely depends on how many users you have, what you're doing with them, and all the rest of it. Okay, what else to talk about? Oh, so this next thing. So I don't know if you heard this in July. It made a small splash in made a big splash in the Microsoft world and the Microsoft dev world and the my world. It probably, not sure that extended to the outside of the Microsoft bubble. Something called Project Oakdale, which was called DataFlex for about 3 weeks until Microsoft received a cease and desist order from the actual trademark holders of DataFlex, who've been around quite a long time, it turns out. So it's now called Project Oakdale, which was the secret name it had before being called DataFlex, which is quite funny, and still doesn't have a proper name. This is interesting if you're a Microsoft Teams house and all your users are in Microsoft Teams. It's a special data store for relational data that lives inside Microsoft Teams. Why is that interesting? Well, if you're building low-code applications using, for instance, Power Apps, and you're then exposing those in Microsoft Teams as applications, which is something you can do, then a lot of those might just be also kind of calling to a database or a data store to kind of retrieve their information, to get stuff done and talk about things. And that seems a bit silly. So what Microsoft have decided to do is say, well, actually, we could take that data store and we could just house it inside Microsoft Teams. That makes it much easier for developers building their stuff because they haven't got to then provision a database. And I know, like, it sounds silly, doesn't it? It's like, well, just provision a database. It's 5 seconds work, right? Everybody knows how to do that. Like, it's every dev's first kind of onboarding, isn't it? Of like, go, you know, figure out the SQL, make the database, connect to it, and off we go. The reason is you've got to think about enterprises and big organizations where it's one more thing to get signed off, it's one more thing to do governance and security and compliance over. It can be a real roadblock. In big companies, this can take 6 months, you know, to get a database signed off. Not joking. Like, I work with customers, and you have, like, they're all agile. It's really funny. They're all agile for delivery. They're agile for dev. But please specify all your requirements for your infrastructure up front at the start of the project because it takes 3 months to get it signed off. Okay. Yeah, so enterprises like this because it's all going into Teams and Teams has already been signed off and approved. So it's scalable, it's IT happy, like it's governed, it's compliant, it's all these things. And crucially, it's included in your Teams licensing as well, so it's not an additional spend. This makes it good for kind of simple relational data stores, so CRUD operations. So if you need to hold on to some data, like edit it, change it, do something with it, automate some actions with it, this is an interesting place to be. I can't show you a demo because it's still technically in preview, and so I'm not allowed to, but comically, I'm allowed to show you screenshots because Microsoft showed a demo yesterday, and I'm allowed to take the screenshots from that video. So here we go. Pretend like I'm demoing it. So I'm in Teams, and I'm going to use the Power Apps application in Teams to create a new application. and I can create a table. And if this feels a bit like a data store, you'd be absolutely right. It's a bit like the old Access, Microsoft Access days of creating these kind of embedded data stores. Anyway, I can create a nice table. I can create rows and columns. So you just build out columns as you might expect. The types are interesting because they're sort of a bit higher level than if you are DBA or that sort of data layer. These are a bit higher level than what you might think of. Things like email and URL. Choice is an interesting one because it's sort of like a relational list of things. And you can do weird things that you wouldn't expect to be able to do in a data layer, like specify the color of the options and stuff like that. So it's very much aimed kind of at like non-developers, just somebody trying to get something done. So I can build these out, and I can build all this data, as you might like build it all out. Yeah, right. It kind of feels really simple, but actually for a lot of applications, that's what they need. I built out the data store, and that's great. From here, I'll kind of click OK, and then Power Apps will make me like a sample, like a template application that is kind of fairly basic. It's list detail. You can see here, you choose what's on the list and the detail. I can edit it, I can delete it. I've got all my CRUD operations here. I can create new records as well. This is just a Power Apps app. So if I wanted to take this and change it, I absolutely could. I can make it do whatever I want it to do. I could add invalidation. I could add different rules in if you delete and add stuff. I can do all sorts of actions, whatever it is that is needed, right? I can build that into Power Apps here. But all that data stays kind of inside Microsoft Teams. And this whole Power App also can live then as an application in Microsoft Teams against a specific channel to get stuff done. This is kind of really exciting for like enterprises who have these kind of data things all over the place that they're trying to keep hold of and trying to manage and govern, and they don't want to create a million different databases, but equally they don't want it all hanging around in Excel spreadsheets and stuff like that. And they want to be able to do stuff with the data and access it in a relational way. So yeah, interesting, really, really interesting. This is really new, which, as you can kind of tell by the name and all the rest of it, and it's currently in public preview, but I think this is going to be quite interesting and fairly disruptive for a lot of kind of no-code and low-code solutions where writing things in Power Apps has been great, but then you get to the point where you need a data store and you need to do something with the data, and suddenly it turns out you kind of can't, because now you need to understand how databases work, and you need to go and provision a database somewhere and get sign off for it, and then you need to figure out connection strings and how you deal with that data, and it's all like it's out of the scope of people writing Power Apps applications. This keeps it nicely in that scope. There is one more thing I want to talk about, which I kind of did put on the front of the slide, but I put it in brackets because I didn't know if we were going to get time to talk about it, but I've rabbited faster than I normally do. So it gives me a chance to kind of talk a little bit about the last couple of days at Microsoft Ignite, specifically something that I think is quite interesting that's come up called Azure Communication Services. So Azure Communication Services it's a new Microsoft Azure service that you can access from within your Microsoft Azure tenant. In fact, I did it the other day, so I could probably show you. I think this is okay to show you. I think it's probably in here. Yeah, it's a way to make it easy for developers to programmatically send SMS messages and send and receive SMS messages and send and receive phone calls. It's a bit of a Twilio compete, I guess, because that's what they do. Also, it encompasses voice over IP calling, both peer-to-peer calling and group calling. It's all built on the same stack that powers Microsoft Teams. So it's a pretty dependable, scalable, enterprise-ready, nice, compliant, legally signed off, safe platform. Developers can do it via WebRTC. They can do it via a set of easy libraries. They can just kind of drop it in. It's really nice. You can send an SMS with kind of 4 or 5 lines of code. If you're heavy into the Azure space, then it ties in nicely with Event Grid, so you can actually subscribe to events like SMS messages being received or chats to a particular instance being received, and you can then kick off like an Azure function for serverless stuff, or you can kick off a flow, you can kick off a logic app. There's a million different things you can do. It's pretty exciting, actually. Some of it's still kind of being built out, I guess is a good way to say it. So this thing where you go and get a phone number, it's coming soon. Yeah, not here yet. So I think right now you can use all the voice over IP stuff. So you can do like peer-to-peer and group calling in a voice over IP way, using kind of WebRTC and stuff. Give you all the libraries to make that really, really easy. There's a bunch of sample code as well. And then yeah, the PSTN and SMS stuff is coming at the beginning of next month, I think. So if you're looking for something interesting to dig into, you could. That's kind of new and exciting. And yeah, I think really interesting. It's interesting for me as a Microsoft Teams developer because it's been quite hard to build some of this stuff through Microsoft Teams sometimes, because Microsoft Teams is putting its wrap around the service, around the kind of the process of sending and receiving calls and meetings. So like it isn't always possible to get to the underlying technology in the way that this actually gives you a direct kind of plugging into the stack that Teams is built on, which is kind of super interesting. Okay, so coming out of this, what do you think? Hopefully, the idea that Microsoft is doing a lot of things to do with no code and low code shouldn't be scary for developers. Like, I honestly don't think Microsoft is out to eat developers' lunch. They hire an awful lot of them for a start. There's plenty more for developers to do. This is much more about enabling users who aren't professional developers to still get stuff done. And actually, I think it's quite interesting because it frees a lot of developer time up for doing all the boring things and lets them focus on the more interesting things, and lets them do kind of interesting things with bots and automation and Azure Communication Services. Oh, we did talk about communication services. Okay, you see. Which is kind of, I think, a good thing. So hopefully you've come out of this thinking like this isn't too bad. Microsoft aren't taking away my job or anything crazy like that. There's far too much work to go around right now, to be honest. This is much more about Microsoft taking the boring bits away. So hopefully that's been useful. Interestingly, hopefully there's some takeaways as well, even as professional developers, like you can use some of this stuff to make problems go away and make it not your problem to have to build as well, especially if you're doing this for people that are on the Microsoft platform in some way, Microsoft 365, Teams, SharePoint, maybe, all of that stuff. What you'll find actually is quite a lot of the time people are licensed for all these technologies such as the Power Platform without even really realizing it, because it gets rolled into the SKUs they're already paying for, so there's not even any kind of additional cost. Anyway, that's me. I'm Tom Morgan. I talk about this stuff all day long if you'll let me. Some contact stuff is on the screen. Thank you very much for watching. More than happy to do questions for people in the Zoom if you want, or we can just chat.
Nice one, Tom. That was really interesting. Really interesting. I had no idea what to expect coming into that, and it's kind of blown my mind a bit, the amount of things that are available, the number of things there. And actually the word that comes to mind for me, which I often use in relation to doing a lot of kind of menial development, is the word plumbing. Feels like this is kind of the plumbing. It's like, oh, you want to connect that thing to that thing? Well, here's all the tubes you're going to need. And you can focus on the kind of ends of what comes out of that tube at the end and what goes into it at the other end, and everything else just kind of happens. And that's cool. Yeah. Because a lot of that stuff can be tedious and quite boring at times, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't actually show you, I probably should actually. No, I can't. Sorry, I was going to show you some stuff, and then I thought actually it's the only stuff I can really show is my work stuff, and that's probably not a great idea. If you look at the flows, which we use for all sorts of things, you get a nice dashboard. You can see like success, failure. You can dig into the failure. You can see the data going through each of the points, the inputs and the outputs. It does make it really, and to do it properly yourself, you kind of have to build all that stuff out, unless you want your user to call you up every single time it fails and be like, it failed, I don't know why, you're gonna have to debug it. That stuff's all built in, so it's really nice, that kind of those kind of things.
Yeah, and it looks like it would allow people who aren't necessarily code writers to be able to piece together so much of the stuff that they need for their day-to-day job without having to
Yeah.
like ask somebody else to help them do it. Basically, it allows
Yes.
them. It's empowering for a lot of people who don't
Yeah.
write code. Basically,
Yes.
to do lots of things that people who write code don't like doing effectively.
Yes.
I'd like
And
to,
that's-
I'd like to
yeah.
pick up on that whole thing, to be honest. Like
Go on.
there was some apologies towards the developers for this non-developer platform, but this no code generation is this is development. It's just a different syntax, right? The logic that you're writing on if this and that, then that, and then passing it to Excel and then extracting it from here and this, that, and the other. That's all effectively what we professional developers are doing day to day, but we're writing it in a particular language. This is a different language we're writing it in that just happens to be a UI. So
And there definitely isn't. You can't throw this at every user and expect them to
sure,
like you know what I mean. Like there's definitely a role for developers if they're not out and out writing the bits. It's an architect role. It's an understanding how things work together role. But yeah, absolutely. Like the less net new real code, the less bugs as well. So like there's no point. I don't know. I've been doing this a while, and so I'm firmly of the opinion now. Like I'd rather not write the code than write the code. So
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Actually, the main question that comes up in relation to that is like, what's the situation with getting data in and out of this system? Like, say we start with this and we have this system that we've used these visual tools to build, and then we're like, okay, wow, this is really useful, but it's massively more. It's utilized a lot more than it used to be, and now we really need to break it out into its own thing. Can we get that data out easily and move it into a different system and do all
yes, like the answer is always it depends a bit. A lot of certainly the bot framework. So bot framework Compose is quite a good example of like you start very visually, but it's generating real code behind the scenes. You can always drop down to the code. Some of the Power Platform stuff, it's always a bit of it's a trade-off, isn't it? Because it's licensed, like nothing's free, and so it does depend on the use. And it might be that if it's a massive success, like somebody's paying for that somewhere, and is that cheaper than hiring or paying for a team of developers to build the same thing? Don't know. Everybody's going to be different.
Yeah.
The nice thing with some of that is that the data stays yours. Like that's a fairly key tenet for Microsoft. They don't lock you up with the data. It's your data. We didn't even really talk about Graph, which is it's an API basically for Microsoft. It's an overall. It's the name given to a whole collection of APIs. But what they've done with Graph is give you a consistent endpoint to go to for all of the Microsoft data that you own. So let's say you're a 50-person company that is all in on Office 365. Let's say you've all got Office 365, so you're wording and excelling and PowerPointing all day long. You can go to Graph as a developer and access that data. So you can access the insights about the files, the people who the hierarchy like of the AD structure, the managers, the teams, the departments. You can get all of that via API calls. You can find out which documents are being shared. You can see which documents have got sensitive data. Like there's loads of kind of API endpoints. Microsoft are fairly open about the fact that it's your data, and they're not trying to like hold on to it for money, if that makes sense. Like they're also a massively successful commercial business, so I'm not trying to like pretend they're a savior. You know what I mean? But it's they're pretty good when it comes to data access for sure.
It's the user's data, and they are just providing valuable services on top.
They want to be the platform. Yeah.
Similar to that, we've actually had a question on the YouTube, which is it possible to make a questionnaire from Q&A like Flow, which stores the user responses in a database or an Excel file for the decision maker later?
So that's interesting. So if I think I understand it correctly, the use case might be that you ask the bot a question it doesn't really know, maybe. And so you want to capture that and do something with it later. There is a sort of specific flow for that in Q&A. There's a few different ways you can do it. I briefly mentioned application insights on the way past for something else. That will kind of keep track of things it didn't know, so you can kind of do that. There's also a whole API for Q&A Maker that you can directly use to kind of post questions in and get questions out and stuff, so you can maintain it. So there is that kind of model for doing stuff. There isn't anything built in to Q&A Maker to like do a human handoff to answer, but you could completely imagine how you could take that code, build in a human, like handing off to a new bot that you made in Bot Framework Composer. You can do handoffs and stuff, and then that could either redirect to a human, or it could just, the easiest thing probably to do in Q&A Maker is to have the default I don't know answer to be, please go out, fill out this Microsoft Forms form, let's say. So you could build a form in Microsoft Forms, have them fill it out, or even maybe you could probably execute that yourself, or execute a flow to take the question and do something with it. Like how you actually figure out what the right answer is a tricky one. So maybe it just emails someone, and then, or like SharePoint approval flow maybe, but like you can come back again, like the person then filling out the answer could do it via a bot or via filling out a form, whatever, and then you could post the information back into like the Q&A knowledge base via those API calls.
Turns
So
up in Teams and starts DMing you. Help! I've got a customer here.
Yeah. Like so it's interesting, like we do quite a lot of these kind of bots, but layered with human handoff, and because you can imagine like it's a really fairly common scenario of 80% of the time we get the same questions. So put a bot with AI in front of it, and then 20% of the time pass it on to the team whose job it is to deal with those tickets and whatever it is.
Learn the answer, right?
And learn the answer. Yeah, exactly. Pick up on what the question is, feed it back into the engine, make it smarter. Yeah.
So we also had a question around incorporating that chat panel onto a website. Is it easy enough to basically embed?
Yeah, it's really easy. Let me show you. Because I did it for that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's the thing I sent. So here we are.
It
So this
like
is
going directly to an interface. That's all I think.
Yeah. So I sort of cheated. Yeah. So there's a few things, right? So here I am in the bot, and the way I kind of expose that to users is through channels. Oh, I'm not sharing. Sorry, I do that every time. Right, give me 2 seconds. Okay. So just go back one. So this is me in the bot. This is that same bot, and channels. I can see 10 issues, which is probably people playing with it, giving it things it didn't understand, maybe. So I can directly embed this using the web chat thing, which is a big blob. So I cheated. So let me just go to edit so you can see. So the simplest embed is the iframe. So I could embed this inside my website. I completely cheated with you guys because I took the embed and sent that to Bitly and made the Bitly link. So what you're seeing is the thing you're supposed to embed in a web page, which is why it's like the full screen of the page when you go to it. What you're supposed to do is put it in a nice iframe like this. That's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is it's called direct line, which is, I can't even see it here, which is where you get an API endpoint to call. And so that way,
that was the second question answered.
Yeah, so there you go. You get an API to call, and you get the response back with, I think this is the answer. This is how confident I am. You know, I'm 80% confident this one. Here are some others. They're like 5%. So maybe you could try those if not. But yeah, you just get the raw data back, and then it's on you to how you want to embed it into your website or whatever. So yeah, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. I chose the kind of quick and dirty one because I was in a bit of a hurry. I've just taken the web chat embed that you're supposed to iframe nicely. There are a bunch of options for like making it appear a bit nicer. The documentation also for this stuff is pretty good as well. Like there's fair documentation for all of this stuff. Oh, here you go. You can integrate like the JavaScript call for like doing it this way instead and render it nicely like as a popover or something. So yeah, a bunch of different options.
One of my questions was around the exports. So there is SDKs for JavaScript and some other framework and languages of choice, but I'm assuming the exports are only to C#.
When you say export, do you mean of
the bot framework? Sorry, I've jumped around here. But,
That's right.
The bot framework, from Composer, for example, you said you could once you need to kind of eject from the Composer,
yes,
you
to
could
go and take the
export.
code. That's a good point. I think it probably is C#. If
Yeah,
I'm,
that's fair.
yeah,
That's
I think it is C#. Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah.
Bot framework Composer is all open source as well, actually. So there is potentially nothing stopping you. I don't know. Yeah, there's potentially nothing stopping you doing it.
For your own stuff.
Yeah. But yeah.
Interesting. One of the things I was hoping to see, whether or not you might have knowledge of, is the Power Automate desktop stuff.
Yes.
Sorry to throw a curveball at you.
No, that's cool. Yeah, no, I'd kind of forgotten about that. Yeah, it's interesting. So the idea behind that is that you run a little daemon on your desktop called the Power Automate desktop thing, and you can record macros essentially. So you can record yourself doing something and do that, and then send that up to Power Automate, and you can then execute that on schedule or in response to something happening. What it uses under the hood is actually Selenium. So what you get out of it is actual Selenium stuff. It uses Selenium like IDE when you go to look at it, which is kind of interesting. It's got some things. So it sounds like magic, but then I tell you that actually when you come to execute it, it executes through that same daemon. So you need to be logged in, machine unlocked, like all the rest of it. It's fine, it works.
When you say Selenium, sorry, I didn't realize you could use Selenium to drive the actual operating system as well as, I thought Selenium was a web driver, sorry.
Yeah, so did I. You're right now I say that. I don't know how it works either.
Sorry, I didn't mean to pick it apart.
No, you're absolutely right. Selenium is, sorry, let me...
you can automate like the whole desktop, just, click on a start button, launch it.
You can, so maybe there's a bit of...
a bridge of some description.
Like a bridge of some sort, or something else on top of Selenium, and maybe it just uses Selenium for the web part and not for the other. I'm not honestly sure.
Because that would be pretty sweet for automating tests of stuff that we can't at the moment with Edge. As far as I'm aware.
Yeah, the challenge is it needs like a logged in unlocked machine. That's the reason. Like,
Les is next door with our Windows laptop. It's fine.
Just like, what's this computer doing? Why does it do this thing at 10 o'clock every day? Tests. What is going on?
Running tests. Yeah. Don't worry.
Yes, I haven't, like, other than kind of trying it a bit, I haven't actually done loads with it, if I'm honest.
That's cool.
But yeah. No,
it just looked quite exciting on the because it was announced at Ignite, right?
Not this Ignite, last Ignite, I think. Yeah. Oh yeah, so I'm just kind of just looking at there's two different ways. There's two different types of UI flow you can make. One is for a web app, and I think that's where I was thinking Selenium. I think that's the thing that uses Selenium. There's a desktop app one as well, which I guess is just like some built-in Windows recording thing that it uses.
Makes sense. I'm not sure whether on stream or off stream is the best time to ask this question, so I'm going to ask it on stream.
It's always the best way.
What's the resource group pull not pull?
Oh yeah. So I bet it doesn't work anymore. I'll have a try. The last talk I gave for Norfolk developers, and I've kept it around because it was kind of a cool project, was something around Azure Cognitive Services. And so what I made was like a website that like I gave out the link to, and you could upload an image, and if the image had Paul Grenier in it, it would come back and like put a yellow box around his face and give you a percentage, and if it didn't, it wouldn't. And it went really well. Like, yeah, we had people like all sorts of, like I had like 5 or 6 photos that they started out with like obvious, like his profile photo is like quite obviously Paul, and got weirder and weirder. It's like one of like him with like Naked Elements. There's like 5 or 6 people. They're all like in a group. It's like picked him out. It was good.
Sweet. I want this hosted on norfolkdevelopers.com. So maybe message me if it works.
If it still works, you can have it. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Uh,
Do we have any more? Do we have any
I
more?
think that's my last question was pull not pull. So
Well, I think that's a
Fair.
great place to end it then. we'll hope for a pullnotpull.norfolkdevelopers.com addition to the website
Yep.
in the near future.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, thanks for that, Tom. That was really interesting. Yeah, lots of that stuff is some of it's new, some of it's kind of old services rejigged and kind of merged together with other things that sounds really powerful. So yeah, interesting stuff. It's not something that I would have bothered to look at probably otherwise. So actually this has been really useful for me to see how it's all what's going on over there. Nice one. Thanks a lot for stopping by.
That's no problem at all. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, I guess we'll say goodbye to the YouTube viewers around about now. So goodbye to the YouTube. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye, YouTube.